Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Double On Radio Gamescast. This week, it's episode number 34, and in the spirit of the holidays, it's Positive Vibes episode. This is the Positive Vibes edition of the Double On Radio Gamescast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan, and I'm joined by my wonderful cohort of co-hosts, Alex.
Hi again.
Ben.
Howdy.
Brett.
Hello.
And Wyatt.
I love cohort of co-hosts.
I know, I was
That
so...
rolls off the tongue so well.
Lovely
That needs to be a regular
alliteration
thing.
there.
That's kind of great, actually.
Whoa.
It's like our opening little thing.
Yeah. Is that normal? I haven't been here for so long, I don't even know.
You
No,
were
I've
here
never
like
heard it
2 weeks
before.
ago, Ben. It's not been that
Was I?
long. Yeah,
Oh my god, time isn't real
I have a
in this-
spreadsheet. It
It's
wasn't
been
that long.
years.
Look, time doesn't exist in 2020. I'm going to give him a
seriously?
pass.
Like, school has been just so unbelievably stressful for the past 2
Yeah.
weeks that it has felt like an eternity.
But hey, we're in the Positive Vibes verse.
Exactly. We're
So-
done. That's in the past. It's over.
Yeah, we it's all done now. Yeah, so this episode's gonna be a little different than normal. We're minimizing any industry related talk, and we're mostly just gonna be having a chat about stuff we like in games. That's it. That's the gist of the episode. I was leading as if there was more to say there, but there really wasn't.
It really wasn't. And that's, you know what? That's a good thing, because when we start saying more things, it starts to get not as fun.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But we do have
Sometimes
some.
the game industry is just not as fun.
We got some Positive Vibes news. So for people that follow games journalism, they probably know who Alana Pierce is, a relatively well-known games journalist who's worked with Rooster Teeth and IGN across the years, and is now a writer for Sony Santa Monica.
Oh, sweet.
Oh,
Yeah,
And
so
I'm not
that's a
jealous
little
about
interesting.
it at all. It's fine.
Of course
I
not.
don't care. No.
It's just a fun little piece of good vibes news. We don't actually have that much other news this week because it's mostly that like post-launch week of the new consoles coming out. Everything's kind of just up in the air of like, what's coming next? Are the consoles not exploding? Generally, yes.
I
Generally,
mean,
they're
that's kinda good
working.
vibes
Old
news,
boy.
right? The console launches have gone fairly smoothly.
We did get an
Not gonna
interesting... Yeah, they've gone fairly smooth. The PS5 and Series X have both had a few like fail cases up, so PS5s can sometimes like have a sequence of crashes and then just stop working.
I've heard coil whine as well, which is
Yeah.
the biggest issue in the world, but
It really
And
is.
the Series
I feel
X has
like
a similar thing.
A lot of people
so.
complain about coil whine, like especially in the PC building community, and it just doesn't make sense to me because even when it exists, it's like put your headphones on and play a video game and you won't hear it.
So, could you explain briefly to a very non-technical gamer such as myself
Oh,
what coil
yeah.
whine is?
So coil whine is like a thing that it's like basically an electrical buzz that like graphics cards are known to do because there's just, like, so much
Oh.
power going through them.
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, your fans in your PC are 10 times louder than the coil whine. So it's really tends to be a non.
Huh.
Yeah,
It
it's
happens
just
with a lot
notable
of
on the PS5
laptops.
because the PS5 is so quiet comparatively.
Yeah, it's
That you
probably
can
the
hear
real
it.
reason why people notice.
All right, yeah. So we also got a cool game reveal. The IO Interactive, who's a studio behind the new Hitman games, is making a James Bond game.
which is such a perfect
That's it.
choice.
That's an
How-
amazing
That
studio
is so
choice.
cool.
How
That is like
on
you could not have
point.
picked you could not have picked a better studio, honestly. Like in terms of
Yeah.
that's perfect.
It's absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. It's probably not coming out for a while. We don't have any other information on it, but presumably it'll be made likely in their Hitman engine. Would be my best guess, and come out sometime in the next few years. We don't know when though.
That's like saying like, oh, like here's Crystal Dynamics and they're gonna make a Marvel game. Perfect. Oh.
Good
Positive
positive
vibes,
vibes
positive vibes.
episode.
I'm so
Positive
sorry.
vibes
Vibes.
episode,
I'm
Wyatt.
so sorry. Positive vibes. My
It's okay.
bad.
It's okay.
I just- I
it's
couldn't help
bound to
myself.
happen.
Hey, I
It's
mean,
like the
if you are
transition into the vibe
into
zone.
Crystal Dynamics Marvel Avengers, maybe you want to just play a short Avengers story. It is on sale for $30 basically everywhere. Now, the caveat that it'll probably be on sale for more down the line, pretty soon, I would bet.
Probably.
But
Hmm.
if you
Definitely.
the resounding feedback from reviewers was that the campaign is very fun. None of us know because none of us have played it.
Mm.
But if you do want that Avengers storyline, this is probably a decent time. If you wait another month or so, it'll likely be even cheaper. But if you really need your Avengers fix, that's an
Right
option
now.
right now.
if you want to be one of those, what is it, 5% of gamers left playing that game,
Yeah,
then
I
you
always
can.
Yeah, you can, totally
I-
can.
We tried to make that as positive vibes as possible.
right. Well, you wouldn't even be the one. You wouldn't be like one of the players who's left. You'd be
Oh yeah, you would be
joining.
adding to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
new.
really,
You would like to join the 5% of players
Yeah.
remaining.
That's also just on PC. On PS4, it's a lot better.
I would imagine.
But
So,
the PC market was particularly harsh to that game. All right,
PC player bases die so much faster. At
so
least in all the games that I've ever played.
just a little bit of fun news. I don't know if any of you have heard about the game Sakuna of Rice and Ruin.
I feel like I have. for whatever
No.
reason.
No.
So this is a Stardew Valley-esque type deal. That's a very vague and not actually that accurate description, but essentially it's a farming game that's got like a 2D platformer with combat built in.
like a very intense, epic title for something like a.
Well, it's about
Yeah.
the storyline is that you're like a god who got exiled and needs to prove yourself by farming rice.
Oh.
It's actually very intriguing, and
different.
apparently the developers of this game actually farmed rice in order to
Wow.
match the experience.
Well
Okay.
then.
And the recommended
Finish.
tutorial for the game is the Japanese Ministry of like Economics Guide to Growing Rice.
Oh.
That's
my
the
goodness.
actual recommended tutorial for the game, which I find
Oh
hilarious.
no, this is gonna be more of a sim.
It's also really not a sim, but it's apparently super faithful to growing rice,
Cool.
which I love.
Faithful
It's just
to
a cool
growing
thing.
rice.
It's a cool little game, and it's done super well in Japan, which is very interesting. It's been in development for like 5 years, so it's a cool little indie story. That's basically all the news. Like, actually, that's basically just all the news for this week.
That's
So-
insane.
We did
Until
also get
something happens like tomorrow.
yeah, there's going to be a huge dump likely on this coming week because Black Friday's coming up. A bunch of stuff will likely happen then. We do have the Game Awards nominees for Game of the Year, which I think is very interesting because this also reveals another side effect of Cyberpunk getting delayed that I think a lot of people didn't consider. They're basically now ineligible for Game of the Year awards
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah.
It's not
Which
fair.
is so ironic.
Yeah.
How much hype is surrounding it. That's funny, but I feel bad for them at the same time.
I mean,
They'll
they'll
get
be in the
Game of
running.
the Year next year.
Yeah, they're still in the running for next year, but who knows what the competition will be like.
They'll get over it. I'm sure.
I,
They're
I'm
gonna make so much money, it's
certain-
not gonna
Yeah,
matter.
I'm sure they'll do just fine.
And
with
the
one
reason
Game of the
is
Year.
because there's usually two schools of thought with Game of the Year awards. There's ones that happen at the end of the year, which usually only run up until November, because people need time to play the games to decide what Game of the Year is.
Which is pretty fair.
Yeah, which is certainly
Very
fair. And then there's the ones that happen in January, which include the entire year, which for those listening is what we're probably going to be doing, is having a January episode that is our Game of the Year picks for every individual member who is there. That's our plan for sometime in January, because, we want to give the actual relative year perspective and not just like 11 months. So yeah, that means for the Game Awards at least, Cyberpunk is not in the running for Game of the Year, which is very interesting.
I mean, if it doesn't come out this year, makes sense.
I mean, the good news for a lot of Cyberpunk fans is we do have very hard marketing confirmation that December 10th is the final date, because copies have been shipped. That's the big thing. Copies have been shipped with printed dates on them.
And
Which
people
means the
have
game's
been
done.
playing.
Yeah,
the game.
which means the game is going to release in that state, because like you can't put on do all the
Other than
process
day
of
one patch.
yeah, like factory making those copies and sending them out and then releasing them like not when the date on the box says. That would be
I
I
mean,
think
they
a
could.
first ever. They could, but like we have the 16-hour previews from everyone now. It's evidence is now pointing to the game definitely coming out. Although we have heard there's some bugs, but not anything too game breaking. We'll see. So yeah, that's not in the running. But our nominees for the Game Awards are Animal Crossing, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, Hades, and Last of Us Part 2. Which I think all those games definitely deserve to be up there.
I
That's about
still
right
need to
to
play
me.
Hades.
I would
I
love
so
to play
many-
Hades.
Oh,
That for
I've
sure.
heard-
I think my vote
Talking
would
about
almost
good
certainly go to
vibes?
Hades.
Yeah, same.
Which is great because every game up there is definitely deserving in its own right and for different reasons. So yeah, this is one of those
I'm sure
few
some
years.
people would disagree with one of them.
Yeah, but I
What
think
it is because we're keeping it good vibes.
I don't know what you're talking
We're keeping it good vibes up in here.
yeah. If you want to
But
hear
I'm
our
not gonna
thoughts on
say
that
the name.
specific game, go listen to our games club on Last of Us Part 2.
Yep.
But
I'm sure we'll discuss that also more in depth in the game of the
yeah,
year.
once the Game
Yeah,
Awards happens
so-
and we actually get those winners, we'll talk about it a bit. But
I'm really interested to see how that. I'm just gonna say, I'm really interested to see how Last of Us 2 fares in the Game Awards and how people are going to react to it.
yeah,
Like,
I'm
whatever
betting
awards it does or doesn't get. I'm very interested.
Hades is gonna win. That's my prediction because I think Hades is the one that universally people love.
I've never met someone that doesn't. I mean, other than like some dumb comments or Steam reviews or something. Like I haven't really met someone that hasn't just absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
You know.
And as much as I love Final Fantasy VII Remake, Doom Eternal, and Animal Crossing, I don't think those three are legitimately gonna have a chance at winning.
Yeah.
As much as I love all three of them, I think those
Yeah.
are.
Doom Eternal was my game of the year for a long time.
Yeah, I think those three are
Personally.
just less universally loved than Tsushima, Hades, and Last of Us Part 2 certainly not universally loved, but I think critically very achieving. And like, I don't think anyone can deny the like audio direction achievements and whatnot of that game, and like art direction and
Doom Eternal
nailing
is
all
up
that.
there in terms of like, because again, that was a game. There are definitely people that didn't like it, but it's such a small like section of people,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this goes, and excited no matter what. I don't think there's going to be a game that I'd be disappointed in winning that, even if I don't personally agree. Whereas there's certainly been years before where there's been a game up there that's just like, why is this up here?
I think like the only one that I would feel maybe it's just because I don't like it would be Animal Crossing if there's one that I would feel kind of bad about just because I don't play Animal Crossing. It's not my thing, but like I'm never gonna begrudge it. That it's great and that people love it. It's just not my thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I could get behind that. It's just like there's something about it that it's just slightly too niche for me for it to be. Even
I
if it
mean, the
was my
sales
pick,
numbers of
you know?
Animal Crossing disagree
I
with you.
understand that, but it's just not. It's not as. I don't know how to describe it, but it doesn't have like the same. It doesn't feel game of the year material to me. That's all. I don't
also-
know how else to say it other than that.
From what I've heard, and I've played a little of it myself, but I don't play a lot of Animal Crossing. But from like what I've heard from people that do, it's not even like the best Animal Crossing. So
Oh yeah, a lot of that from some. I have played basically every Animal Crossing game and spent a ton of time with New Horizons. The gist of that is that New Horizon leaves out a lot of stuff that was in other games. There's new stuff to make up for it, but some of the stuff that was left out people really wanted. So it's like this weird situation of if Animal Crossing New Horizons is your first game, it's probably perfect. If you've played the other ones and you really wanted some certain things, like the big thing that stuck out to me is they don't have the playable mini game things that I always loved in the GameCube one, where you could play little arcade games if you got like the console.
That would have been cool.
But we also don't know, might be coming at some point for Animal Crossing, because Animal Crossing every couple of months is getting giant content drops. So that could certainly be on the horizon, as it were, for New Horizons. Okay, moving on.
Nice.
Aw.
You snuck that in there. That was professional and.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, also the update for Insomniac's Marvel Spider-Man on PS4 with the new suits and whatnot just came out. So you have all
There's
that.
an update
Yeah, there's an update that adds
Do
some
they
new
have-
suits.
for the
they
original
have, like-
game.
Yeah, for both the original and the
Oh,
remastered
the
version.
Miles suits in the.
Those are Miles specific. So those are Miles Morales suits.
Is it just suits? Is it more content?
It's suits.
Gameplay wise, okay.
It's suits. Yeah.
So it's just random.
It's suits and some
like,
like
bunch of
fixes,
cool-
I think. And they will also allow you to export your save from that version to the one that is bundled with the launch edition of Miles Morales, if you get the $70 version. So you can now export your save from the PS4 version to the PS5 remaster
That's kinda cool.
and get all your content there. So yeah, it's a neat little thing. All right, so that's our news cover up. And if anything crazy happens during the case of this podcast, which has been the case a few times,
Oh yeah.
we
I don't know
will
what you're talking about.
talk about it at the end. But that's our news out of the way for now. All right, so next we have an award to give out. And because this is the Positive Vibes podcast, we're going to be giving an award to something that we personally just want to see. So this week's award is the Double N Radio Gamescast Most Desired Sequel. And of course, Wyatt, I promised you Prey 2 would be here. It is here. So so the category, to explain what this award actually is, because our awards are always a little esoteric and weird. This one specifically is for sequels that never happened, but and may not, they might have existed at some point, they might not have existed. But sequels that people want, and it doesn't matter if the series continued, it's if they got like a sequel, essentially. So like Prey has Prey, but Prey doesn't count because it's not Prey 2, right? So the other two games I have up here, and you guys are free to add your own sequel. The only caveat I have here is it has to be a game that did not receive a direct sequel. So like that's why Half-Life 2 is not up here, because Half-Life 2 is a sequel already. So that franchise got its sequel game in already. So Half-Life 3 not on the list. But you know what is on the list? Spore 2. Wow, that was such an underwhelming reaction
you
for
have
Spore
thoughts?
2.
I didn't gasp.
I gasped.
I think the word spore in video game conversation hasn't come up in a long time, so I think
Yeah,
Brett was just
really.
stunned.
I was not expecting it.
The sacred texts?
The sacred text of Spore 2. I think everyone here would love to see a Spore direct sequel. Personally, I
mean,
certainly would.
Okay.
Be
You
fun.
know, people hate on Spore, but I love that game.
No, I loved
That
Spore.
game
I
was-
played
that
so
game
much
was
Spore.
So much fun.
Oh yeah.
Import
And,
your
like-
horrible phallic-shaped monster into the new world.
Yep. Next gen Spore. Imagine Spore 2 next generation.
Oh my
Mm.
god.
The
Fun
load
fact,
On the
times.
skin.
I did have a lot of fun with it.
I think Spore 2 would be a lot of fun, especially if they fix some stuff from the first game. But our final contestant, so we have Spore 2, Prey 2, final contestant, Star Wars Republic Commando 2.
Oh, baby.
Oh,
Now, I don't know about you guys, but my vote here is certainly going to Republic Commando 2.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Republic Commando is a Star Wars first-person shooter that came out a long time ago.
One of my personal favorite.
It has one of the best like squad management systems. It's still super streamlined, so it's not hard to understand, and it happens quickly on a controller, which is great. Because I think a lot of like newer games with squad formation mechanics are just a little overly complicated for their own good.
Thank you, Halo 5.
Yeah, whereas
Funny you say that. Because a lot of the designers that worked on Republic Commando, specifically on that squad system, also worked on Halo 5 for their squad system.
Oh, how
So-
people change and become worse. Anyway, good vibes. Continue.
good
Ryan.
positive vibes episode, Brett. Positive vibes episode. All
Wow,
right.
you've already ruined it, Brett. You've already ruined it.
The Matrix is just kind of unfolding right now. All
And
right.
it's all Brett's fault,
So, yeah, Republic Commando 2, I think everyone here would love to see.
for sure.
It's a great game. So, Alex, which of these three or another sequel that you want to see? What's your vote?
I've never played or heard of Republic Commando 2 until this point.
Which sequel most tickles your fancy? Or which franchise? It doesn't have to be if you haven't played any of the games. Just throw out a franchise you want to see a sequel to.
Minecraft.
Minecraft, I did consider putting Minecraft on this list.
Minecraft never
doesn't
needs
need
a sequel, though. It's one of those games
Yeah.
that's just going to receive. Yeah.
It's one of those games like Overwatch.
Yeah,
that doesn't
they've
need
kind
a
of-
sequel.
They've kind of gotten
Ooh.
iffy with those offshoot games like the Minecraft Dungeons
Yeah.
or whatever it is. What was the first option again?
Spore 2 versus
Spore
Prey
2.
2 versus Republic Commando 2.
Oh, absolutely, Sport 2.
Great. I'm glad
I
to
wanna
see at
see-
least one vote for Spore 2.
I want to see HDR hair
Absolutely.
that you can add.
Subs
I want to see bump
scattering
maps for the
skin.
skin. Give me pores.
Ugh.
Or 2.
All right,
Spore
Ben.
2.
Ben, what is your pick?
I think a new Spore game could be really cool.
All right. Spore
I
2,
really do.
second vote. All right.
I think if they made it good though, like okay, like obviously the first one was super fun, as I said, I
But it
think
wasn't
the
good.
moderns- No, it wasn't. It
It was
wasn't good.
super fun, not a good game.
But a new Spore that like seriously took advantage of like just I guess really just take that idea of what Spore wanted to be and make it good. And then it could be really good. I think it'd be
Alright.
like actually like a really good video game.
Okay. Brett, what's your vote?
Like I don't usually go into these like trying to think of like my own one to throw in there, but it's just no question Republic Commando 2.
Yeah.
Like that.
I'm sure I would
even like
agree
a
with all of you on that.
remaster, even like a remaster of
The
that
original
one
would be
is
great.
just, yeah, it's just necessary because it's a classic that I don't think enough people have played. It's so
haven't
much
played it.
fun.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I can attest to not playing it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say I would probably agree with you if I had played the game,
Mhm.
because I've heard everybody who ever talks about the game has nothing but praise for it. So
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. My vote's also going to Republic Commando 2 because I really just want to see that game in modern tech, or something like that game, because it's a shooter that was unique enough that nothing else has really gone as close to it. It was also weirdly dark at times, which was really refreshing in the Star Wars game.
Well, it was the first time, because like the first time I had played it, I hadn't seen the Clone Wars show, right? Because I've only watched that very recently. But it was the first time where I got that feeling of like the camaraderie between the clones, which is what makes them so
Exactly.
likable.
I mean, Republic
it's got
Commando was
that-
out before Clone Wars.
That's what I'm saying. Is that
Yeah.
like that was my first time ever ever kind of experiencing that, and it was just so cool, especially with the squad mechanics. It feels that much more that like that thing that everyone loves about the clones is like that much more present.
Yeah, I think it certainly brought a lot more depth to the clones themselves.
Who would you want to make it if there's a studio that you had in mind? Who would you think would?
Who would I want to make it? I think.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Dream would probably be id. I would say id working with
Interesting.
another company on AI design.
I say Respawn.
I don't know. I feel like id hasn't made a multiplayer game that is fun in a
Well,
while.
it's not multiplayer. At least the
It's not?
original isn't. No.
Oh,
It's
okay.
it's
I feel like it
you're-
would benefit.
Yeah, it's a
from
single player
being-
game.
Okay. All right. But they don't really do any of that like squad play stuff either. I don't know.
I know, that's why I would want to see id make the gunplay,
Well,
and then another
I mean,
studio
you could
handle
also
the
say
squad
the
stuff.
same thing. I mean, I'm thinking of Respawn here. It's like, well, no one thought that Respawn would make a Souls-like, or even something like Creative Assembly
Well, I'm
made strategy games, and then all of a
Of
sudden they
course.
made this great horror stealth game. You
And
know?
yeah, I think
knock
Respawn
on
could
them.
certainly do justice because they actually have experience with Star Wars now. But at the
And
same
first-person
time,
shooters.
I want to see. I really, really want to see a high quality version of Republic Commando and with the gunplay, right? And I also want
I
to see
wouldn't-
Respawn work on Fallen Order 2.
You know what? I wouldn't
There's going to be a
be
sequel.
too upset about either, to be honest with you. I wouldn't be upset if Dice made it.
Yeah, Dice
I
could
would,
probably.
I'd be fine with that.
I would trust
if
Dice
you-
as of 5 years ago. I don't know about current
Yeah.
Dice.
I don't know. If you were talking to me when the first Battlefront came out, I'd say no. But now that like looking at what the second Battlefront has become, yeah, absolutely. Battlefront
I'm
2
also
was, like,
not-
actually super fun.
I still say no.
I would be iffy on the gunplay in Battlefront 2, especially because
Yeah.
Battlefront or Republic
Well,
Commando is a first person shooter, and Battlefront
you
2's
look-
gunplay is designed pretty heavily for that type of game.
Dice isn't unfamiliar with first person shooter combat though. Like
Well, that's the thing I'm thinking
Yeah.
about too, right? Is that
Seems that way
they know how to
sometimes.
do good like gunplay that's
you've
like in
played-
depth and that feels more
Yeah,
that doesn't
I
feel
know.
as casual, right? And then obviously Battlefront 2 was aimed to be more casual, but if they did something like
they can do it all. Like look at Battlefield
yeah.
4, look at even Battlefield 5. Like say what you will about the content, but the gunplay in that game is phenomenal. Like
Until they ruin.
there are very few other video games that are just like as fun to jump in and shoot at people in. Like
yeah.
seriously.
Yeah, I think for me it's just a big thing of like who would be able to do the squad system justice.
Mhm.
'Cause that's so integral to Republic Commando
Yeah.
as a
Because
franchise.
apparently the same developers that made that squad combat system can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
positive vibes.
Positive vibes.
come on, Wyatt.
That
No,
wasn't
we
nearly.
can't-
You
listen.
can't blame that on me anymore. You can't.
We can't blame it on anybody because we're
I
having
can blame you for
positive
opening the
vibes.
door.
Yeah,
There's
all
no
right.
blame
All right,
going
moving on into the main topic of today's episode. We're talking about just things we like in games. That's the topic that you can take as
Can't get
be
more
as
positive
broad.
vibes than that.
because normally, like, we've done a lot of episodes on things we don't like, because it's usually really easy to nitpick things apart.
Right.
Yeah.
It's less challenging than saying specifically what you really enjoy about a game, because a lot of the time those things that you enjoy, especially if you're just playing the game to relax, you don't really think about until after you've played the game and we're like, wow, that was really good.
I mean, I think the best parts of video games are the ones that you don't overtly notice. Most of
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like good audio design and whatnot, I think
Right,
is
exactly. Audio design
fundamental.
is, I think,
Score.
going to be all over the place in this episode because
Score,
truly,
definitely.
yeah.
Oh, a lot of the time I think score can be a little bit more overt in that
It can, but it can
usually
also be
I'll
very
notice a
subtle.
good
Well,
score.
then speaking of DICE, I make the argument that the musical cues in Battlefield 1 added so much to that game, whereas in the other games they just feel a lot less dynamic and interesting now. Whereas
they're
like the
just not
musical, oh my god, the musical flourishes in Battlefield 1 are just beautiful in my opinion.
for operations.
Oh my god, that
Ever since-
the attackers advance theme is one of the coolest things
Yeah.
I've ever heard.
That was a nice
Anyway.
actually return to form because like I feel like when they rebooted the modern games like Battlefield 3 and 4, they decided to put this ungodly filter on their theme song. It just
Yeah.
makes it sound like some weird dubstep and like it's still really epic, but it's like
Yeah.
I don't know. It
And-
lost something from when I used to play
Palpatine
like
beatboxing.
And look, you
if
can
you've ever
complain
played
about
1942.
yeah.
Sorry.
And
that's
and we can no, it's all okay. We can complain about Battlefield 5 all day, but they also had really
Yeah.
great music at just the right moments sometimes where it just felt incredible. Like if you're defending and the attackers are coming up, you can see them running like over the hill or something. You just hear that music and it instills this sense of dread. Like it's legitimately scary to see
Yeah.
like tanks and people just coming past the front line and you hear that music kick in. Ah, it's fantastic.
I think the attackers even scream in that game when they get to charge. I think
Oh,
all the
yeah.
character models actually start shouting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a problem for some people. Well, because it's really annoying to get your position given away.
I mean, if you're
When
all
you're-
sprinting towards the same objective,
Yeah.
your position's given away by the point of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's some of the. Anyway, this is positive vibes. I'm not even going to talk about it.
Yeah, we're not going to dissect shooter design because we do that a lot.
We're having a very hard time staying on positive vibes.
I don't know what you're
Well,
talking about.
let's just get right into it.
Well,
Let's
look,
just- somebody say
this is
something.
why we actually positive vibes. We had like a positive vibes team warm up before this to get everyone in the positive vibes mindset. It's still hard.
It is. It
But-
really, actually.
That's because a lot of us are generally very critical of games because we work in
We
them
also just got
or
out of a
around
very
them.
stressful couple of weeks,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which can make it difficult.
So I'm going to open up the conversation. I think one thing that I always really, really enjoy in games, and we talked a little bit about this with the Battlefield 1 audio design stuff, is when music reacts to what you're doing.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
I think that, to me, that's like one of my favorite elements of a game that often does go unnoticed because if it's done right, it blends into the game.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite examples of this is Devil May Cry games have usually one combat track for every character, which doesn't sound like a lot if you're hearing the same track every time you're fighting with a character, right? But the way it gets so interesting is that every rank that you go from like A, B, C, D, basically are the ranks there, and then S is the highest, will add new layers onto that track. So like when you hit S rank or like triple S rank, that's when the vocals start coming in, and then you hear like the full basically anime style rock death metal screaming,
That's cool as hell.
which is a lot of fun. Whereas if you're doing pretty poorly, it'll just be the D level. You just hear like the back of the track, and that's always something I find super fun.
Doom kind of did a similar thing where every time you used, I think it was the machine gun, there's like a little guitar riff that plays with whatever
Yeah.
track is playing, which was really cool. And it just fits because it's a little guitar riff that kind of matches the shots per second of like the weapon and stuff. It was such a cool little subtle touch that you don't notice at first.
Doesn't Doom do that throughout the entire game? If I remember correctly, like the more intense the combat gets, the more intense the.
Oh
song-
yeah, but
the
I
song
guess
gets.
but it gets more if it's with the individual shots that you're doing, it's more granular, which is interesting, I think.
Yeah. A cool thing that Divinity Original Sin 2, which is a pretty popular RPG, especially on PC, does is at the start of the game you can actually pick the instrument that your character's music is kind of attuned to.
That is awesome.
So you can pick like
cool.
a variety of different instruments. There's like violins, there's flutes.
Ooh.
So when your character is doing something cool, that the swell in the music will be whatever instrument you selected, which is something I love because it means
violin all the way.
Yeah, it means you can pick like your character's theme. So if you want a character that's a little bit more like dark or heavy-handed, you can get like a drum or have that heavy impact, or you can go with the flute and have like a lighter tune. It's just a very nice system.
It's actually a really cool way to also draw some attention to it, so it doesn't go completely unnoticed, which is actually kind of cool.
Yeah,
it's a great way to take advantage of having like a full orchestra for games. 'Cause I think a lot of games like record their stuff in orchestras and then don't take advantage of the fact that they can record every part separately.
Yeah,
and like play with that mix a lot. So
well, that's why I've always felt like more focus needs to be given on how to specifically make video game scores, because it's a very different process than making traditional scores, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to just pick someone random from this list, which means Ben, you're first.
Fantastic, because I've been playing a lot of Path of Exile, and it's just the noise that currency makes when it drops in this game. Oh, it's perfect.
Dude,
Literally,
especially because you can
my heart
change the
skips a
noise it
beat.
makes.
You can, exactly. And you can like psychologically train yourself to release dopamine to specific noises. It's literally incredible.
It's
like
amazing.
You can have like seriously, you're like, oh my god, that noise means that a chaos orb dropped. I'm like one C richer, and now I'm like so happy. It's just so great. Like it's the little thing, and like the loot filters as well in this game. The way you can just change them and like customize them to the way just exactly how you want them. It's really, really nice.
Yeah, that's always super fun to me. The loot filter thing. So Path of Exile is an ARPG, like Diablo. In games like Diablo, when you have like you get that unique item drop. But what if you're sad because it's a unique item that you're never going to use because it's like a staff and you're playing a melee character? Path of Exile, you can just tune that so the staff is now worthless to you, and it only makes that sweet, unique sound when you get the thing you want.
Yeah, really valuable drop, or you can not do that and have it so that you see everything and you waste all your time. But that's what you shouldn't do.
Okay.
That's why they give you the option to change that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Alex, I can hear you just shaking with excitement over there.
Oh, okay. So when I first came up with this, I thought it was no, because most of the time when you see it, it's a pretty big aspect of games. But I like it when it's just in there for the S's and G's of it, just for the satisfaction of being able to do it. Destructible environments.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Speaking my language.
It is so satisfying. Not only seeing like it. Let's take for instance a shooter, like seeing bullet holes in a wall is all fine and dandy. That's just a nice little alpha you can slap on there. Having the outer smooth layer of the concrete chip away as you shoot at it to reveal rougher textures. And then, oh, you've gotten to the iron reinforcing bars inside a barricade. Oh, you've shot this barricade enough that you can see through it. And then it crumbles. Well, that's just with barricade. With buildings, there's so many, physics and things you can unfortunately would be painful for developers to do because to take an account for that. But it's so nice to be able to see that in a video game. And I have this deep-seated need for destruction.
I mean, honestly, at this point, it's almost necessary to have some level of at least that kind of like destruction, even like micro destruction, just because it's like such
especially in
part
AAA
of
stuff.
the way that you experience, like your weapon interacts with the environment. And
again, and where I first really saw this, because I think Uncharted 4 put an emphasis on their destructible cover, but shooting the sandbags and them just slowly deflating is very nice.
That sounds so cool, actually.
Yeah, that's always just a super cool thing to do. I know for me, a game that does that super well is Control. Control has so much like environmental imagery that happens.
You can take debris from the environment and use it as a shield. Oh,
Dude, and then you shoot that debris into a wall, and the wall chips apart. It's so much fun.
You make more debris.
I think is most of it is
Oh.
cosmetic, right? Because most of it is just particles happening and not necessarily actual physically interactable things.
Mhm.
But still, it looks so impressive that I really don't care.
Seeing your effect in an environment is a big deal for
Yeah.
me.
It is.
And for me, I don't know who here has played Red Faction Guerrilla.
I mean,
I have
But-
a little bit.
That game still has one of my favorite destruction systems.
Oh, it's super impressive.
I
Wait,
still
is that the
think-
one
I
that
don't know
Crackdown
if
based
there's-
itself off of?
Kinda. At least
I
that
don't know if
Crackdown wanted
there's
to do the
much-
destruction of.
I don't know if there's much that's out that even starts to come close, like to the level
Well-
of destruction that game has.
What was Brian? You were talking about it last week. That one game that was like based off of a physics, like
Teardown.
and then Teardown.
Yeah.
Yes, I've
Is
been
that the
wanting
one
to
that
get
like
that.
just came out?
Yeah,
it's a very
Teardown
nice
just came out a
voxel
while ago.
So
looking
the
game.
thing that I understand about that game is that certain parts of the destructible environment doesn't have physics enabled until it's completely separated from an object.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a
which is- it's
limitation
still
with
super cool.
Teardown being voxel based, in that every section of a building, it has like every like set amount of inches essentially is simulated, which is a lot more taxing than what Guerrilla was doing, where Guerrilla had larger essentially blocks that buildings were made out of that could break in a number of different ways, but were a
Yeah.
little bit more easy to physically simulate.
It's like the two ways that I've seen it is the incredibly taxing of computer generated random like detonation
Yeah.
patterns for that, and then there's modeling something in set pieces to break apart into.
Yeah, Red Faction was a little bit of both, but the amount of random gen stuff was a lot less intense because it was generally happening to smaller amounts of objects at once. Whereas in Teardown, things are a little bit more crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
I've also
still- I
been playing.
just-
I don't know if anyone here has played Noita.
No.
But Noita
Also,
is,
another
I've
game
heard
that
of
I've been wanting to get for a while.
Yeah, Noita is a lot of fun
Because wow,
because essentially it's basically like someone took one of those old particle simulators that people would play on the internet, like Dust, and
did
turned it into a
magic
action game.
spells like this.
All right, so that just sold the game for me. How much is this?
It's not
I
a.
used to play-
It's an indie
Do you
thing.
guys remember the Sand Falling game?
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh
Sand
my
Falling
goodness.
game. The
Sand
Sand
Falling game. It
Falling
was this
game?
little flash game that literally all you did was play with particle physics. And it was so I spent hours and hours playing that
I think
game.
everyone did. That game was incredible.
As
Yeah.
So funny you should say that. As we're talking, I am playing an itch.io game called Sandspiel where I'm just playing with dust
Yeah, like
right now.
there's something so satisfying about like that kind of physics.
Yeah, I think it's just super fun. Yeah, I think it was called Powder Game. Is that, if I can remember correctly? Yep,
There were
it
so
is
many of them.
Powder Game.
There were definitely a couple of them.
There were a few different iterations of it. I think it was the Powder Toy was the like physics sim one that people just used as a fun thing to play. And then there's been tons of like spin-off of them. I remember there being like it was a hugely popular thing for like early iPhone games. That kind of physics sim was super popular with those. Yeah, it's an interesting little genre. All right, Wyatt, we tend to save you for last. This time we're not.
For some reason.
Well, you're not
I'm
last
I'm
this
still
time.
not sure why. All right, so I guess while we're on the train of shooters, let's keep the train going for a second. For me, there's like a set amount of things in a shooter that I like to see personally. So the first one for me is infinite sprint, because I've always felt like limiting the amount of sprint, unless it's like specifically designed around it in a way. I've always felt like that's super obnoxious when when you have a game where they just won't let you sprint the whole time. I don't know. I find it very annoying and
Yeah.
very
Understand.
kind of unnecessary a lot of the times, and just kind of ruins the pacing. Later Call of Duties have started doing it, which I really appreciate. Another thing, I guess this is like less of a shooter thing, but another thing is like if you have a game where you're jumping around a lot, being able to like edge grab is so important. Again,
yeah,
kind of
mantling.
like if you just the difference between moving around the environment between Destiny 1 and 2, right? Is
Yeah.
that Destiny 1 did not have edge grabbing, and so you're just kind of awkwardly rubbing up against walls sometimes, and it was really weird. Destiny 2 lets you kind of grapple onto ledges and stuff, and I just think it adds a lot. It's a small thing, but I think it adds a lot to the design. And then the big thing for me, obviously, it doesn't work in every game, but the big thing for me is I love dashing. Like if I'm playing a shooter or any kind of game that allows you to do a short distance kind of like dash to get out of the way of like an attack or something. Oh, you've won me over almost instantly.
Yeah, I think for me, dashes are like they just kind of determine the tone of the shooter I'm playing if they're in a shooter. And I think like dashes in like action games are a little bit different in that I think they're almost required to make it fun. Because if you don't have that kind of dodge, then things just kind of it depends on the pacing. So like if Dark Souls had a dash, it'd be a little weird, right?
But it has the dodge roll, which is
Yeah, I mean it's a different function. So I mean like the fast-paced dash quick step kind of thing. The presence of that kind of determines the pace of a lot of games, I think, because by adding that, you're giving people that very quick reaction defensive option. So you can make the pace a lot faster because people have that option to defend so quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas in something like Dark Souls, you need to make sure that they have enough time to do something like parry or block in advance. I think it's an interesting like pacing determiner.
So much about shooters is like a lot of it is your aim, definitely, but there's also a huge element of like positioning and trying to like out strafe your enemy a lot of the time, especially in like more classic shooters. And I've always felt like dashing is just kind of a natural extension of that. You know, it's a natural extension of trying to outmaneuver your opponent to get a better angle on them. And I just think it makes like moment to moment fights more entertaining.
Yeah,
and
for me, it really depends. I think I love them in single player stuff, but I think with multiplayer, I don't like it when every game has it, because then everything starts to feel really similar.
I guess I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's like, it almost for me like even I can like understand that it doesn't fit the design 100%, but like I'm gonna like it either way. You know? Like,
yeah, I think for me, it's a difference between playing the older Call of Duty games and a newer Call of Duty game a lot of the time.
The slides are huge.
Where it's a very different feeling because the older games are a lot more about positioning in advance and like preparation a lot of the time because you need to know those routes and because you don't have that quick option to evade or outplay someone if they spot you first. Which gives it a very different pacing. And I think generally the faster pace is more in now. And it has a bit of a much wider audience for the most part, so it's a lot more common. But yeah, I think there's certainly value to both approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Although generally, I think nowadays if a game doesn't have that kind of thing, it feels a little outdated.
Yeah, for sure.
Very interesting.
Yep.
All right, anything else, Wyatt?
I mean, this usually doesn't add much to a design either, but I like being able to, if you're sprinting and you tap whatever crouch button, it goes into like a little slide. I've always appreciated that little touch as well, just because even if it's not functional, almost like dashing in some games, it's like even if it's not that functional, it looks and feels so cool to do, and just the ability to be able to have it and be able to do it is enough
for me. Sliding is even more important than dashing because.
Mm-hmm.
I find at least now, if I play a shooter that has a sprint button and a crouch button, if I press crouch from sprint and it doesn't slide, I get upset. Legitimately.
Which is weird. It just like the momentum just doesn't carry over, and it just is very,
Yeah,
like,
I don't know.
You know, I will, you know, argue that I like Halo with dashing all day, but I will also agree that the crouch slide that it has in Halo 5 completely useless. No one ever uses it for anything. Yeah. But again, it's
I like that it exists.
Yeah, I like that it exists. I like that it's there. It just feels nice and it feels kind of cool to do it sometimes. I don't know.
You guys remember the Black Ops 2 dolphin dive?
That was great.
That is how you do that's how you do that wrong.
I personally
that's the incorrect way to do it. Yeah. Well, just because like it's so slow, you know, and the dash needs to be kind of or a crouch thing rather needs to be kind of quick.
Yeah.
You know, and it also you take damage, so it's like why do it? It's not worth it.
And you know
Like,
what
you
else
can-
isn't
you can
worth
kill
it?
yourself by doing
You know what else isn't worth it, Wyatt? Negative vibes, which you're bringing to the
Right.
table right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It was
All right.
unique.
Yeah, it was a special snowflake. That's a good way to put it for this episode.
It's a special dolphin snowflake. Dolphin-shaped snowflake.
Good.
It's at least unique. Hey,
I
Brett,
saved that one.
Yeah.
I feel your intensity of the positive energy just radiating
Oh, I'm a trembling.
from your position right now.
Brett positivity.
I have my list because I thought we were just supposed to do like little things, so they're a little small, but they still make me happy.
Well, that was the
Whatever makes you happy.
original intent, but like we have a lot of time
This is true.
in these episodes, so we can go through different things. You know, we have more time.
I have a feeling that we'll.
I
all come up
I
with
was going
more
to talk
anyway.
about something, but I know you're going to talk about it, so I didn't talk about that thing.
Would it just so happen to be the diegetic navigation featured in Ghost of Tsushima? and
Brett,
Dead
you know me
Space?
so well.
And also Shadow of the Colossus, because you can hold your basically what I'm talking about is, I don't necessarily have a problem with, because games are games, and you have a HUD if you're in like first or third person or whatever, and you have the waypoint thing where it's like an arrow or like a mark on a compass or something on your visor telling you to go to this place or whatever, and that's all fine and good. I don't think that's a bad thing. There's such a thing as like too many waypoints to just like guide you around. That's like, okay, shut up. But the best way to do it is the way that these three games have done it, which is to just work it into the world somehow. Like Dead Space does not have like a classic HUD at all. It's all part of Isaac. It's all part of the player character, and that's awesome.
It's super
So, like,
refreshing. It also makes the game
yeah.
that game still holds up. I think partly because of that.
so well.
Then
So,
you would
like,
really appreciate Metro Exodus or just the Metro series in general because they try and have such little UI as possible and have
Yeah.
everything diegetic, which is super cool.
I need to play more of those games.
They're super cool.
At the very least, play the first one.
Yeah.
I don't think the first one's the best one though. Anyway, keep going.
I don't know.
Why would you start anywhere but the first one? Anyway,
I didn't start with the first one.
When you when you hold out your hand in Dead Space and a little laser comes down that shows you exactly where to go, and in Dead Space 2 you can change it to show you where the shop is, where the bench is, where anything is, and it's so helpful, and it doesn't like take up a bunch of space on the screen. You have to stop. I mean, you do have to stop to do it, but you don't have to like hold up like a big map to your screen to do anything with it. And in Ghost of Tsushima, it's the wind, and it makes the entire environment affected by the wind blowing in that direction, and it changes to anything that you have pinged on the map, and it is so awesome. And in Shadow of the Colossus, it's like the sword that you hold up, and it's the next Colossus you have to take down, and it's like a beautiful beam that just goes directly to the area where it is on the map. Like that stuff is so much more like satisfying and engaging than having your average like HUD thing, it's a lot more immersive, because you can't really do that with a game set in like modern day in like a real
Yeah.
world scenario. But in games that have the benefit of being in more fantastical places, like just use it, man. And that's one way to do it. It's not even like a hard thing to think of, because like Shadow of the Colossus and Dead Space are not new games. Like they're not old, but they're like Shadow of the Colossus is a PS2 game.
Older.
Yeah,
yeah.
they've been around for long enough that we should probably have seen some influence on things from them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
I would say, speaking specifically about Shadow of the Colossus, because I've been playing Pathless recently. I feel like the Pathless kind of takes a lot of inspiration from.
They're very similar.
A ton of indie games take inspiration from Colossus.
Yeah,
I think it's a lot rarer for AAA stuff too. I think the only like big publisher game I've seen that really does is Dragon's Dogma has influence from that in like the climbing things. But there hasn't really been like a AAA boss rush game like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's been lots of indie things. Like I think Fury, even though it's very different from Shadow of the Colossus, is thematically very similar in how it handles like that boss rush idea of being set in a narrative where you're not fighting like the basic enemies. You're just going against powerful like encounters on their own. So I don't know. I definitely love those games. And I think for me, Tsushima's like the wind stuff really set a bar for me with how open world navigation should be handled now, because it feels so clean in Tsushima, where instead of having I can turn the HUD down to basically just not exist, and then just follow the breeze and like grass and leaves to get to where I want to go, and just end up there. And it feels super natural, which is something I love. It just feels so like it belongs in that world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna shout out a very specific thing in Skyrim that I think a lot of people won't like, which is the clairvoyance spell. All right, now hear me out here. The clairvoyance spell in Skyrim doesn't work very well, but the concept behind having a spell in world that is how you handle like navigating to things for like a quest you have to do is super interesting to me. And I would have loved to see them like expand on that and make that a like the only way to get direct quest waypoints would be doing something like using a spell that does that effect. I think that's a very interesting way to handle that kind of thing. I would love to see.
And that kind of coincides with another thing that I just kind of thought of, and it's not on my stupid gamer list, but like most things where it's like, oh, I open up the menu and like for this example, like I put down the waypoint on the map and then it's there and then I can go. And like I don't really mind the concept of having to do a little extra like role playing to get the equivalent of the waypoint there. You know, like I don't mind games where it's like Warframe where you have to go to the relay or whatever to go to the equivalent of what's like a shop or like a trading place that would just be a menu in another game. Like I
Yeah.
love going to places that are representative of like menu items because then it's like, okay, there's a loading screen, I guess, in between that and eh, but it's positive vibes, so I don't really care. And it's cooler to see a fully realized place that had to be made in that world to be a real shop that you can
Yeah.
use.
For me, I think that's part of the reason why I like the Yakuza franchise so much.
Mm.
Is Yakuza, there isn't a shop you can go to in the games that doesn't have an interior and like have visual depictions of everything you're doing. And even beyond that, like a lot of the games have multiple locations of the same store, because so you'll see like there's a convenience store brand in the game called the M store, right? But if you go to the M store on this street versus the M store on that street, they look different. And that to me is just like this huge,
That's cool.
like it's an element that's super small, and Yakuza can get away with it because they aren't set in sprawling open worlds. They're set in very tightly dense neighborhoods. But another game that does something similar is like Watch Dogs 2 did it as well, where if you go in like a clothing store, you have that, you can see the racks, and like Red Dead 2 also does the same thing where you go in a store to view things. And I think doing stuff like that, Red Dead 2 to me sometimes goes a little bit too far, in that sometimes it's just a little bit obtuse to do what you want to do. But there's certainly a middle ground that can be struck there of like you can still have your menu-based shops, but give them some theme, you know, like Watch Dogs. And yeah.
If you're feeling in the mood for that more like sim type of feeling when you're shopping, like Red Dead 2 by far does it the best.
Oh, absolutely.
Like there's just so much, like even shopping for items, it's not just going through a menu, you're going through like a store ledger and you're just flipping through a book. It's so cool.
Or you can walk around and look at the shelves and buy stuff off of the shelves. It's just super fun to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still think
when
that's
you're in the mood for that and you have the patience for that kind of thing, it's great.
And something else to me that always stands out is I'm not always a condoner of mini games, but I think mini games done right are incredibly entertaining. Totally. So like I think a lot of people when they play like Assassin's Creed, the newer Assassin's Creed games, they might see, oh, I can play this weird dice game. Why would I want to do that? To me, I'm like, I can play this weird dice game. Awesome.
Yeah, no,
like,
same.
I love that kind of stuff.
Especially because doing in Valhalla specifically, especially because doing some of them will actually be really great character progression. So you can do this thing called flighting, which is really simple. It's basically just someone says something and then you pick between different dialogue options to try and insult the person.
It's a poetry battle.
It's a little poetry battle. But if you win, you get an increase to charisma, which means you can make certain dialogue options that you couldn't otherwise. It's super cool.
And I mean, I'll say for me that isn't always what I want. Often I want the mini games to kind of exist by themselves, to exist for the sake of fun. I don't think they need to always be tied back, and in certain cases, I think it might be going a little too far. But with something like, as long as it's a relatively minor effect, like to me, Tsushima again nailed this. Of you have all these little like 1 minute, 30-second long things you can do that often just give you like a cosmetic or something fun, and like that's something I always love, is just seeing like you can do a haiku and get a cool headband reflective of what you wrote. It's just something super fun to me. And I wouldn't really want those to be more integral to the experience, because as soon as you're forced to do something, I think it loses that charm.
Yeah.
Which is where Assassin's Creed typically,
Yeah, that's where I think Assassin's Creed often takes a step too far, is they feel the need to make everything
but I will say
relevant to the main stuff.
I will say in terms of like the flighting thing, you don't have to. Like you can play through the entire game without having to do it, but it's just if you want to spend the time to do it, it's cool because, you know, it offers up different dialogue options, but it's not like you'll lose the game if you don't do it. And
Yeah,
so that was
I do
cool.
think we'll have more of a conversation about the flighting stuff when we talk more about Valhalla, because I think Wyatt and I are both playing through it right now to give some more like thought out thoughts. Hopefully next week, I think will be a good time for that. But
probably
not like full thoughts on the game, but thoughts on like what we've played so far, which I think generally has been very positive. But yeah, I think to me, like the games that do that best are Tsushima and Yakuza, and that Yakuza has often just weird mini games that exist for almost no reason. But I just was playing Yakuza 5, which is a PS3 game, and I can go and I'm playing as the main character, and there's a taxi driving mini game. But this taxi driving minigame is like super well thought out. It has its own mechanics and control schemes. You have to use like the blinkers and make sure your passengers are happy and have conversations with them.
What?
This is
Yeah,
entirely
Yakuza is awesome.
optional. Entirely optional.
That's awesome.
That's
You
like
don't
what Yakuza's
need to
saying,
do it
isn't
at
it?
all. If you
never
do
comes
it,
into contact with the storyline at all.
well, it's like loosely connected to the storyline, but you don't need to do it to see the storyline. But if you do want to learn more about this character's like taxi driving job, if you play that, you learn more about your coworkers. You unlock different side quests you can do to go like to a mixer with one of your coworkers and try to hook them up with someone.
Oh my god.
It's
That's
just
fantastic.
these little side things. And then, of course, because it's Yakuza, it's not just a taxi driving minigame. You can also get into street races with a gang. And of course, you need to beat them in these street races on the highway to prove that you're better, which has a separate control scheme from the taxi driving. Which is still, it's not like
Fantastic.
very separate, but like when you're in a street race, you don't need to use your blinkers. So instead, you have a drift button.
I disagree.
And of
Get the
course,
nitro boost.
because it's Japanese, you have a nitro boost, and it's always set to Eurobeat.
Yeah, it better
Oh
be.
my goodness.
And the nail in the coffin for this for me is I'm not very far into Yakuza 5, but Yakuza 5's big thing. It's got 5 different protagonists. Every single one of them has one of those.
Good.
A different minigame set for the character related to what they do. And it blows my mind because
goodness.
they're all entirely optional. You don't ever need to do any of it. But of course I spent like 8 hours street racing on a highway because I wanted to go drinking with my boss and like uncover the story of what happened to his family. I'm like, it's just super cool. It's just things like that are completely unnecessary but add a lot to games.
Mhm.
And that's like a testament to, like, in that specific case, that's like a testament to the characters, because I feel like if the boss or whatever for that example was just like kind of not well written, or just like kind of like a crummy character, then you probably wouldn't care as much to find out more
Yeah.
about them. But if they're super well written and it's like, oh well, I want to see even more of this writing, is what my brain is trying to tell me, then yes, I will drive the taxi for 18 hours to get the proper ending.
Yeah, it's great. And you can do all that. You can ignore it if you want to. And you can always, like, if you finish the game and want to go do them, you can go back and play through it if you want to do it after the fact. So it's just something, I love that kind of side story where they have their own mechanics and whatnot. And that's something I find is super rare in games just because it's hard. Like, that's the kind of thing that requires a lot of forethought, a lot of dev time, and just a lot of commitment to a final product. And in the case of a lot of modern things, like, is just not as doable because they're putting so much time into the main game that it's hard to do that. But adding little elements of that, like Tsushima's haikus, adds at least a lot to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking to that, like another, while we're on the topic of like open world games and like those little details and stuff, one thing that I love that, like, when I think about it, not a whole lot of other games have done is adding a lot of detail to just, to just the NPCs around you. So one of my
Absolutely.
favorite features of Watch Dogs is that, like, you can say whether you like the hacking or not. I love so much that you can hack one person, especially in Legion, where it gives you the most amount of information out of any of the games in the series. It gives you so much information about one person, that one random NPC that's just walking by in this massive open world, and it does it for every single one of them, and it's so cool because it just makes it feel that much more alive. It makes it feel more real when every single person has their own backstory.
Yeah.
It's just such a nice little detail.
Well, one of the most clever things about Legion is that because, of course, it would be unrealistic to calculate that for every NPC in the game world at all times, the way Legion handles it is they have a social system that runs in the background that if you interact with characters, it builds out their schedule more intensely.
Yeah.
And then when you eventually add them to like your recruitment list or something, that's when they're like finalized as being like very in depth. But if you're just interacting with them, like, so say you run your car into someone or like into another car and they come out and like start yelling at you. If you just go by and don't pay attention to that, it's not gonna, they're not really gonna be weighted more heavily in that social system. But if you profile them and like interact with them after that point, the game will remember that and then start to show that character to you again at the next opportunity they have. So you can kind of like actually interact with characters that aren't narrative characters, are just there in gameplay senses.
That's wild.
Which is just a super
really
cool
cool
system to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thinking about it too, like Legion's whole kind of selling point at that central mechanic of recruiting everyone almost feels like a natural progression for the series, because they've been so focused on like giving so much context to each individual person that making them playable feels kind of like the next natural step in that regard. Like it always feels like the series was leading up to that in a way, if that makes sense. It's just really interesting.
Well, yeah, I think Pokemon with people is something that is just inherently fun. And like there are certainly changes I want to see. I really want to see Legion get a larger limit to the characters you can have in your party. So you can actually start recruiting people that aren't great. Like, I love the idea of just recruiting someone who's a terrible character. Like, they have no good traits, but they're just entertaining. Like, I love being able to do that, but with the number of people, it's a little restrictive right now. And the big thing for me, like, we are being pretty positive on Legion. I do want to add, I still can't play the game because they haven't fixed positive vibes, but I got to keep people up to date. Can't play the game right now because
no, you got to be
saves.
100%. No, I get that.
But I love the game. I want to play more of it. I can't right now, but I will as soon as it's fixed. So that's just something to keep in mind with Legion. I do think 2 also, something that Watch Dogs 2 did, and Watch Dogs 1 I think also did this. I can't quite remember, which is weird because I was playing through it a little while ago. The text conversations and like phone calls, to me, even if they're completely useless, like they do nothing, but they're still really entertaining. I think those are really cool, and I hope they make their way to Legion at some point, because they're very fun.
2, honestly, Watch Dogs 2, one of my favorite Ubisoft games ever. I adore that game.
Yeah, I never eventually. I need to go back and do that at some point, but Assassin's Creed got its hooks into me, and so just doing Assassin's Creed and Yakuza, which is certainly a good thing. I think also that does bring me, Ubisoft did do a cool little positive vibes thing right now for Ubisoft Connect is having like their launch. And if you've used the any Uplay connections in your other games, you can go back and they'll make like a little video for you. It's like those weird little Facebook videos where they go back and like calculate stats about your stuff.
That's cute.
It's just a cute little thing. And it's neat to know that I've apparently played a lot more For Honor than I thought I did. It's like, wait, my most played Uplay game is For Honor? And I was like, I guess so.
Aight. Whatever you say, Ubisoft.
It's just a fun thing. Those weird little like game things are always cool, just where they tell you a bunch of stats that are completely meaningless but very fun.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's a bunch of our little positive vibes. Anyone have other positive vibes things they want to talk about?
I got one. Voiced protagonists or voice playable characters, I should say. The argument is made all the time about why there are silent protagonists, but I don't agree with that at all. Because speaking personally, because the argument is that like, oh, if you have a main character that you're role playing as, and then they talk, it's like it immerses you less into the story, and I entirely disagree
Me
because
too.
I am more distracted by them not saying anything while the
Yeah.
story is happening than by if they just said something. Perfect example. I'm stay positive vibes, but I gotta explain myself a little bit. Metro Exodus, love that game. It's super immersive, but you don't have a voiced uh protagonist, and
Fortune.
I think and and he also voices
Okay.
during like loading screens where he like has these little monologues, so they have a voice actor for him, and I just find it I found it would have been more immersive if he had actually been able to speak, and that's me criticizing it while also staying positive vibes. But I loved that's another reason why I preferred the uh Mass Effect trilogy than when I was playing Dragon Age 1 or Dragon Age Origins, for example, just because I felt it was a lot harder to get into Origins just because my main character didn't say anything. And Mass Effect, like, boom, your character speaks, and it's just that much more it just draws you into the entire game much more, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely agree that voice stuff I do generally prefer it. But there are certain situations for me where I'll actually prefer an unvoiced protagonist. Though a lot of the time it's not because the character is unvoiced, it's more because of like dev time constraints and the changes that need to happen. So like sometimes indie games will prioritize having a voiced protagonist over an unvoiced, and it'll just feel weird because maybe the quality's a differential or there's less dialogue than you want. I think that could happen quite a lot. And to me, especially, I think the big thing with me, if the game is first person and is like an RPG type deal, I don't care if my character is voiced. If it's third person, I get a little bit more iffy because then my character already feels like separated from me as a player. So I think it's a lot more noticeable. But in the case of like Fallout New Vegas is I think a classic example of this. I don't mind the lack of voice acting for the player character because I assign them my own voice, and it's like I'm looking through my own eyes into the game because of that first person perspective. And it also lets the developers add a ton more dialogue because they don't need to account for like 8 different dialogue options. I think it's very clear in like Fallout 4 that's what happened, where they had to tone down the amount of stuff that could happen in a conversation because you suddenly are now having to voice act like 2 different characters. So you have the choice of male or female. And then you also need the choice of like, well, what if I want to play a character that's like a different ethnicity or doesn't have or would have like an accent, where I can't do that now because the character is always going to sound like a Bostonian.
You may be white. That is it.
Yeah, it's like I think diversity is a big argument against that a lot of the time, or at least the option to disable that kind of thing, because it can feel really weird if like I want to play a character that's different. Like I'm kind of having this concern with Cyberpunk, because I think I'm super looking forward to playing Cyberpunk, but like what if I want to play a character that's like Asian, and then I suddenly have this very like white sounding
you can change their ethnicity though.
You can, but I don't
Just
think
the
it's going to
voice
change the
actor changed,
voice.
so, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like that kind of thing. I'm like, is it just going to sound weird? Do I need to disconnect myself from that? So I do think there are certain games that benefit from not having a voice protagonist, or at least having that option. I think option would always be preferable.
Saying this in the most positive vibes way possible, I totally understand your argument, but I disagree.
Well, I mean, I think it's not that I'm asking you to change your opinion, it's that I'm asking you to understand why I would say that, right? So like a good example is if I'm playing like Pillars of Eternity that's set in a fantasy world where characters are like different, all sorts of different people, and then suddenly my character starts speaking in a voice that doesn't sound like I would imagine for them, especially in games that like inherit from Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think that becomes a lot more problematic because then you're restricting what people can do with their mind and being creative.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there certainly are games that will benefit from making that decision not to, especially
that's
smaller
there's
like
never been a
indie
situation.
stuff.
There's just never been a situation for me where I preferred, and maybe that's just the games that I personally play, but for me, there's never been a situation of like, oh, I wish this character wasn't voiced.
I think it's certainly a genre thing for me, because like I don't think I would ever play.
I wish Tinkle wasn't voiced.
Yeah, I don't think I would
the
ever
second
play.
I hear
Go ahead, Alex.
the second I hear Link say, "Well, excuse me, princess," in a canonical game other than the CDI, I will cry
That's time to
from
give
both
up.
pain and joy.
I will say something I'm starting to get less and less with Zelda is the silent protagonist shtick. Because I feel like they're starting to push really hard in Breath of the Wild against
They're
that.
giving him a huge personality boost.
At the same time, it's like it feels really weird that he's not saying anything. It's
Just
I still
staring
find
at
it very
Zelda.
fun because it's just a very interesting like decision.
Unless there's some morbid reason where either he was born mute or someone cut out his tongue, and that's the requirement for becoming a Hylian soldier or something. But
yeah, that's the requirement for being Link. You have to have your tongue removed at a young age.
But there's also the other thing to consider too is like the other thing to consider too is voice versus unvoiced, right? The other thing you have to keep in mind is how that affects dialogue.
But yeah, that's
Because if you have a
primarily what I'm talking
character-
about.
Yeah, if you have a character that isn't voiced, then you have like characters that are speaking at you. They're just kind of like speaking to a brick wall, you know, and they're just like, I'm gonna sit here and state all of the things as if I'm having a conversation with you. It's almost like I don't know. It just
I
bothers me
think
because like, as
generally to me
someone
that's
who's
a
very
writing
much
thing.
about but for someone who's very much about dialogue writing, when you don't have another character that's talking, it just affects the dialogue. You don't have that rapport anymore because your character literally can't have it because he can't talk or she, whatever.
Well,
And, I've
that's kind
seen
of what I've been burning to say the whole time since Ryan mentioned the link thing is that like it's like I think I prefer I'm more on Wyatt's side a little bit where I prefer the like everyone should have like a say or whatever, including the main character. But I think that does depend on the writing. Where like if someone like like walks up to Link and like addresses him like with a question that requires a statement that is not a nod of the head or a shake of the head or something like that, and he literally does nothing, then it's like, okay, this isn't like a ha funny Link's been the silent protagonist this whole time because the game started before voice acting was possible in video games. This is just kind of like, okay, why is anyone else voiced then if Link's not going to talk?
Yeah.
Because that even like I'm playing Chrono Trigger right now, and that's an example of a game where like a lot of the characters just have really good character, and that's an SNES game. No one is actually speaking; everyone's just reading. But Chrono, the person you play as, never says anything, and literally time is being completely contorted, and a being from the primordial past is being brought, and he has nothing to say about it. And it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
you know, the point of having a silent protagonist is supposedly so that I could relate to them. And I do have something to say about it. I have a lot of things to say about all those stupid things that are happening to my poor planet right now, but unfortunately, I don't get to because Chrono isn't saying anything.
Yeah, and I will say a game that does that right,
Chrono
I think, is
Trigger.
Disco Elysium.
Mhm.
Where Disco Elysium, you are an unvoiced protagonist, but your inner thoughts have voices.
That's cool.
So your inner thoughts
Because
will
that's
have
deliberate.
conversations with you as
That's
the
way more
player.
deliberate than just not having voices. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's when I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it makes a legitimate case for that decision of the reason Disco Elysium can have so many player options is because you still have voice acting around those options. It's just not from the player, right? So the player, I think, in that game probably has more dialogue lines than anyone else, but the way you handle them is very different because, like, instead of being, oh, I say this, your character just says, like, I'm gonna do this thing, and then replies in conversation. You read out the text and you click the text that replies the reply you want, and then your inner thoughts will often have responses to that, which I think is like a great way of handling that because Disco Elysium, I think everyone except yourself is voice acted, so it's still a situation of like everyone else has distinct character and your own voice is just not there, but there's still a lot to play with and it's a very unique perspective. So I think it can certainly be done really well in games. It's a writing thing. Like you have to have really good writing to make that not an issue.
Right.
Which is often an issue in things like JRPGs because they can often be written fairly poorly, especially from a dialogue perspective.
Yeah.
So when they're written well, it stands out a lot and is really good. But there can certainly be situations where it's not so obvious. But yeah, we've been talking about voice acting a lot, and I think voice acting is definitely something people can always get behind.
Well, yeah, and
Genuinely, it
especially
adds a
as someone
lot.
who like puts
Even if it
story
is,
above almost anything in a game, it's important to me specifically.
even if it is, whoops, all Nolan North.
Yeah, whoops, all
Yeah.
Nolan North. I love the idea of someone just like going to like a pantry shelf of voice actors and accidentally just spilling Nolan North all over everyone in the game. It's
Well, it's
entirely
funny.
voiced by Nolan North.
It's funny too because it's kind of a meme that he's in like every single game ever made, and there's even like because like he's in
Him and
Miles
Troy Baker.
Morales, right? Yeah, I know not Nolan North. Troy Baker is in Miles Morales, right? Which I didn't even know. I was like, wait, what? You just didn't notice it at first, but like even after all the times I've heard both of those guys in games before, I can't think of anything off the top of my head where they gave a bad performance. You know, even if
yeah.
they're in a bad game, they're always doing a good job. It's
Yeah.
so weird.
That's why they're in everything.
I mean, in Ratchet and Clank,
Yeah.
Generally,
wouldn't have
voice
guessed
actors are
it.
in everything. They're in everything for a reason. Either they're really
Yeah.
good or they're really
Yeah.
cheap.
Right.
Um,
I was gonna whoops, all Nolan North. Yeah, he has fun doing it though,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
for
and it
sure.
shows.
although I do certainly think there are cases where like voice direction can be iffy because there have been games I've played where like it's Nolan North and it sounds like Nolan North. It doesn't sound like the character.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's like classic like movie thing of if you're watching a movie with Tom Cruise in it, sometimes it'll just sound like Tom Cruise, and
Well,
not.
and
no, I'm
I also
perfect,
think it's I also
go
think
ahead.
it's things like that where if let's say if it's 3D, like if it's computer graphics or something like that, and the character model looks like the person, you'd expect a similar voice to come out of them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
some voices just can't come from certain shapes of people, I guess.
I'm
is
so
how-
curious how it's going to be in Cyberpunk, trying to like disconnect Keanu Reeves from Johnny
Literally
Silverhand.
You
It's
literally can't.
I
Oh,
I
yeah.
I don't think you can because in the talking about other, I guess, sort of podcasts here. In the Night City Wire, they were talking about Keanu Reeves is Johnny Silverhand. Johnny
Yeah,
Silverhand is Keanu Reeves.
they picked Keanu Reeves because he fits Johnny Silverhand so well. So I'm like, it's not an issue. And I certainly actually I kind of like the idea of certain characters in games just being actors.
Hmm.
As much as it's weird in Death Stranding, it's still really entertaining to see like a bunch of actors on screen and just go like, huh, this is an odd situation.
This is literally Leia Seydoux talking to Norman Reedus.
Especially when the
right
voice
now.
actor
Yeah.
and the actor are different.
Yeah.
Like it's just
Oh, yeah.
I see like Guillermo del Toro and then a different voice comes out and I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And cool.
But kind of back to what Ryan was talking about in terms of voice direction. I mean, again, like you can tell if you're playing, if you're playing Avengers, you can tell that Iron Man is just Nolan North, right? But then you play Last of Us 1 and you meet this character named David, who's this creepy, like, I'm not going to get into it, but you meet a character named David. And I did not realize until maybe my second or third playthrough that he was voiced by Nolan North. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of shocking how different he sounds. And
These
not
actors are
only-
common because they're really good at their jobs.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying is that like there's so few moments where I've thought like, oh, I didn't recognize Nolan North because you can always just tell. But there I was like, he's a completely different, like his character is obviously very different than someone like Nathan Drake, but also like his inflections, his pauses, the way he like carries his sentences and stuff is so different. It was interesting.
Yeah. All right. So, any other voice acting?
Yes, a small one.
What is it, Brett?
But-
What's your
but
voice acting
still,
hot take?
I like. Listen, we all know that video games appeal to the male fantasy. And that is a power
Putting a
fantasy.
monocle on a crab.
Of course, but it's part of why certain types of games are fun is because it's a power fantasy and they want to make you feel like you're a total badass, like destroying groups of aliens with a gun that has a million bullets in it. And part of what makes that really cool is not only that like it feels like good to do that, but also when you have a group of, let's say, Marines around you and you go over a jump in a warthog and they all go, "Woo, yeah, that was awesome!"
Oh.
Like,
Yep.
or any other like comms chatter, like Halo and Ace Combat are really good examples of just like Marines that look at the main character and go, "Oh,
Titanfall does it
yes!"
too.
Yeah, Titanfall also because they like even the grunts in multiplayer matches will all just stop and go like, oh my god, it's a pilot. Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Or if they're on their team, they're like, oh, now we got a chance because they saw you
Exactly.
running by. It just makes you feel so cool.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
do it again. I'm gonna reference Uncharted and talk about their background chatter.
I mean, actually, just to
Do it.
pause
So
on
much
Do it.
character.
Do it.
On the game, the second one, Titanfall 2, for
Mhm.
just a second. Like even the trailer for that game is literally just talking up the pilot. Like
yeah.
Yeah.
it's like, dude, pilots are the coolest thing ever. They're literally like above humanity. Like they're just unbelievably powerful.
If you're
And
not
then you're
another
like, all right,
pilot,
cool.
you're
Now I'm a
screwed.
pilot. Yeah. Now I get to be that unstoppable force on the battlefield.
Just elevates you so much. Like
Yeah.
even in like Ace Combat, it's like, okay, it's like a jet flying game, but then you have people reacting to you blowing up one of their friends that was nothing, and they're just like, how could he even move like that? He's
I know.
inhuman.
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, I am.
It's like, oh, this is hitting that spot.
Well, and
Yeah,
that kind of perfectly transitions into another one.
I want to hear
where-
Alex said something about Uncharted chatter,
Oh
right?
no, that's right. Go ahead.
Oh no, it was just that little bit there, especially in 4 when you're doing their open world bits with like 2 or more characters in tow, just having seeing their conversations. They have conversations by themselves, and I think it's relatively scripted, but it's still they're having their own conversation. You can get up out of the jeep in Madagascar, wander around, and they'll still be talking.
Yeah.
Like, and you can eavesdrop on their conversation and stuff like that. There's
And even
so much character.
and even the way they a nice little touch is that, like, if you're driving around and you're mid conversation and you hop out, you're like, hold on 1 second, you go off and do a thing and you walk back and you're like, okay, wait, where were we? And then the conversation continues.
Yeah,
It's such a nice
totally.
little like connective bit of dialogue
Or
it's great.
and I don't know why when you're driving the jeep very recklessly,
Oh,
and
yep.
you just hear Victor go, "Oh, my spine."
No, it's great.
Yeah.
It
Our
reminds me
background
of the
chat is
little
really cool.
conversations that you would have with Boy in Dad of Boy.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. God of
You
War
never
does the
heard that
same
one before?
thing.
No, I have never heard it called Dad of Boy, but now
Really?
I will exclusively. I
Yeah.
still need to play that. I should play that before I
Oh,
do
well, that's
Miles
why I've never
Morales.
heard it called Dad of Boy.
Yeah, it
because
is
you've not
a
played the game.
wonderful game.
I have the
Yeah.
game right next to me on this table.
Ooh,
I have
just
not
Yeah.
played it yet.
staring back at you.
Yeah.
But all that talk kind of leads me into one thing. I know Ryan and I have talked about this before. Again, it's one of those situations where, like, I almost don't care what context, what kind of game it's in. I love having AI partners. Like, even if they suck, even if they just are absolutely useless, just having them there, having that chatter that we were just talking about, and just visually seeing them fight with you is such a nice
Yeah.
feeling. You
No,
know?
I'm certainly like that too. I think having AI just even existing near you makes the game feel a lot more alive.
Yeah.
Because like
And it gives
it's a
you
big issue with like Oblivion in my mind is that I love that game, but often you're just alone.
Yeah.
And like even if you have an AI, they don't say anything, they don't really do a lot. Which is pretty on par for the time that the game came out in, but like it's a lot more interactive. As much as people meme Lydia to death, at least she talks, right?
Right.
you get some chatter.
She is sworn to carry your burdens.
Like especially, I don't know if how many of the people here have played KOTOR, but KOTOR had like companion chatter, especially in like elevators and whatnot. That Mass Effect would later have as well. Stuff like that just adds a lot to the world that I really like.
What one like back and forth in Mass Effect that I'll never forget. I think it's either 2 or 3. I'm pretty sure it's 3, where there's a certain mission where you're going through it, and if you're with your romance option from the last game, right? And then you have some third companion with you. You two will talk about your like past relationship and make some kind of innuendo, and they'll be like, "Oh God, all right, let's just move on."
Yeah.
Like, because my romance option was oh man, wow, my brain hurts.
Tali?
Anyway, Tali,
Liara?
thank you, Tali. God, and then I had Garrus with us, and then Tali and I were doing some like some funny romantic banter, and then Garrus was like, oh, Oh god. It's just like it's such a great little like, and it just made me like just so appreciate that I had others there with me. And again, as someone who really cares about like characters and dialogue in a game, it having AI companions, even if they suck from a gameplay perspective, it's nice to have just so you can talk to them. It was one of the reasons that I feel like maybe Last of Us 2 wasn't quite as strong, is because you're on your own a lot more, and I felt like that was to that game's
Yeah.
specifically to that game's detriment.
Yeah, I think that's why, going back to like why people love Last of Us 1 so much, is just having that AI companion who is, first of all, not a burden most of the time. Despite being like narratively a burden, you don't have to actively do too much to make sure Ellie doesn't get like murdered. Right? Like you don't have to babysit her. The same way as like Elizabeth in BioShock Infinite, of these side characters that are constantly with you, but not basically escort missions.
Right.
And they're also just super strong characters in their own right, with lots to do.
They even went so far as to like they're not gonna negate like it, like if they're at cover that you want to be at, they won't block the cover so you can't sit there. You'll just like kind of position yourself right over them, which was such a nice little touch. And even just that image of Joel kind of like, especially as the game goes on, having Joel kind of lean over Ellie in almost like a protective stance visually really fits their relationship, which is nice. So
yeah, it's just having that companion characters that aren't burdens is a big thing.
And again, kind of breaking off of that as well while we're on the subject, another one that I like, again, almost regardless of context, I love having romance options in a game, just because it allows you to learn about it allows you to like develop that character more than maybe you would have otherwise. Like if you care about a character, you want to learn more about them, it's a great way, even if it's not like you just deepen your friendship and it's not a romantic thing. You know, it just helps you understand that character much more. And even going on like the loyalty missions for Mass Effect, just doing missions for them, you know, in whatever context, just builds your relationship with them much more. And yeah. I was
also
sad to see it not in Outer Worlds, definitely.
Yeah, I think with Outer Worlds it was most likely a time constraint thing from my mind.
But still,
you could see that
looking
it
at it as
could
an
have
overall,
yeah,
as an overall product, would I have liked the game more if I was able to romance Ellie? Yes. I probably would have.
Maybe not saying Ellie right after talking about Last of Us and romancing.
Okay, I'm thinking about a different game. You guys know what I'm talking about. Ellie the character. No. Ellie the character in the Outer World. Y'all know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Positive vibes. Y'all know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, Wyatt.
Namaste. Everyone calm
Y'all-
back down. Ryan, continue.
This is not Wyatt the Rich Evans chapter right now, because we're in positive vibes.
All right, so
Anyway.
I moving off of what I was saying about like having romance options just tell you more about a character. Something I always really appreciate in games is when they have relationships that are super in depth that aren't romances as well. Stuff like again, I'm gonna keep talking about Yakuza because I'm playing Yakuza, but the idea of like bonds, like familial bonds that aren't family, where like the main character in one of the games is the owner of an orphanage, and it explores like how that parental bond is different from a normal family bond, but it's still super important. And I think that's like having explorations of that kind of character thing in different games is really, really cool. Especially like I think Mass Effect handles it generally pretty well, of like how Garrus can basically be like your best bro if you talk to him the right ways and everything. Just of like having character depth without necessarily having them be romance objects.
Yeah.
Is also super important.
No, I mean Garrus is probably like one of my favorite companions. I had him in as a right by my side in every single game. He wasn't a romance option, but you would go on missions with him and you just got to know him. And that last kind of like cut scene before the final segment of the game where it's you and Garrus at a
Remember, no spoilers.
No. No spoilers. I'm just saying Ryan knows what I'm talking about. That whole scene.
Garrus the bro code embodiment.
Yep. Yeah, I do love seeing that kind of stuff. Like Fire Emblem A ranks are something I always love, is just seeing how characters are interacting with each other on a different level is just very cool. Especially when it's like stuff like, I think a lot of games often don't explore that kind of storytelling, which makes me sad, but when games do it, it makes them stand out.
Red Dead does it as well. You know, they have missions
Oh
out
yeah,
really
Red Dead does
forwarding the
really
central
really good
plot,
job
but
of it.
but they
Both
just
the
have
first
missions where
and
you're
second game.
yeah, but you know that the infamous Lenny mission where you're at a Valentine is
Yeah.
great. Does it forward the plot in any way? No, not
Do
really.
I
Is it
care?
really
Absolutely not.
It's
no?
for
Is it a
Lenny.
lot of fun? Yeah. And do you like Lenny more as a character after that entire mission? Yeah, of course you do.
And do I feel the
It's
game is
that's
better for that mission existing? 100%. Like
100%.
I don't know. I think video games have the opportunity to do a lot of really cool stuff with characters, and the games that take advantage of that are usually a step above the competition.
And a big
It's nice.
reason for that is the gift of time, because you know books can be
Yeah.
however many pages in one book, and then you got to make it a series. You got to come up with multiple entries. Movies, they can be maximum like 2 hours, 2.5 maybe.
I mean, I'll say
I-
books can do the same thing if they're at least if they're a series, because like I'm the
But
kind of
those are
person
still
that
separate books,
reads. Yeah, but like
you
I've read books before that one book will take you like 100 hours to read, and they can do that same depth of character
Looking at you,
that games
Worm.
can't. Yeah, looking at Worm, looking at Worm, and everything Brandon Sanderson writes, all very good, but yeah, it's a lot rarer in especially novels and movies. But I think TV shows and books can generally do pretty similar levels of character depth.
But
Will
video
they?
games has all the time in the world to do whatever they want.
Especially
You know,
because they
it's
can
like
make it
that-
optional.
Yeah,
That's
it's
always the
that
big
gift
thing to
of-
me.
Yeah, and it's because having it be optional satisfies people who want to learn more, and then versus those
Yeah.
who are like, no, I just want to shoot stuff or whatever it is that they're doing. Like,
Because I think in
purely optional.
Tsushima, if like I was required to do all the side missions, I wouldn't have enjoyed them as much, because then it feels like it's a chore to get done in order to see the end of the game. Whereas if I'm actively making the choice to do them, it's because I'm interested in that character and I want to know more about their story. Which is
It's
like
part of the reason why Assassin's
oddly
Creed
large
feels
part
as
of it,
long
maybe.
as it does. Is because there's a lot of things that, in that you have to do in order to complete the story. Where it's like, if this was optional,
I would probably still do it and have more fun doing it.
Yeah.
Which is like restraint is often a very important thing in game, and especially having trust in your player that they will likely explore a bunch of random stuff. Because one of my favorite things about like the Witcher series is that they're often designed with the idea that the player won't experience everything in a single run of the game.
Oh
right?
yeah.
And very intentionally that you can't experience everything in a single run of the game. Like if you play The Witcher 3, it's impossible to get like 2 different outcomes to a quest, right? You can't do that in the same playthrough. And especially like with endings and whatnot, where there's different endings based on your interactions with different characters throughout the game. Like if you want to see the other one, you're gonna have to do basically another run through and just play very differently, which can make it really refreshing and really have that's give you a lot of longevity in gameplay. Which is again like why people love Fallout so much, because even though 4 did less of a good job of that, it certainly still had that amount of depth where there were still very different ways to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
That's why so many people spend so much time playing Fallout games and like Skyrim, Elder Scrolls, is because of that depth of different replayability options. Yeah, it's always something I love to see. All right, we're running over time already.
Again.
So
Oh,
well,
always, but
I say
it's
that
good.
the reality is we don't have a set end time anymore.
No.
We just kind of my general guidance is once we hit an hour and a half, we're hitting that point where it's probably wise to start wrapping up.
Right.
If we don't have
Yeah.
it's the point where we don't need to keep extending the show anymore.
Yeah.
Anytime over an hour, we're allowed to end whenever we want. But once we hit an hour and a half, it's like, well, do we
It's
really
when
need
it
to keep
naturally
going?
feels right for the episode
Yeah.
question.
And I think we're hitting that point where like there's a lot of minor stuff we talked about. I think voice acting became a huge topic of this conversation just because it's really integral to a lot of games,
Mm-hmm.
which is always really interesting. And yeah, I think writing as well. Like writing in games makes a huge amount of difference.
Yeah, well, that's every time Ryan and I talk about Valhalla on our show, is we always come back to how much better the writing is, and it just makes such a big difference. Because
Yeah, especially specifically the dialogue writing, because like dialogue in games is incredibly important.
especially in a game like Valhalla, you're talking to a lot of characters, and like it's a really good example of that, because Odyssey, I think, has a more interesting story right off the bat. At least it starts very strong, but Valhalla has more interesting writing, and so I'm more interested in it
I
from
care
that set than I
far
do
more about the
Odyssey.
characters in Valhalla, despite them being less interesting as people than
On
a lot of the
paper, they're
characters
less
in Odyssey.
interesting. In
Yeah, on
practice, they're
paper,
way more interesting.
in practice, because they're written a little bit better, and that's also subjective. Like, I think there will certainly be people that prefer Odyssey's characters just because they resonate with them more closely. But that exists for anything, right? Like, there will be people that prefer Garrus, and there's people that prefer Jack in Mass Effect, just because of the kind of things they enjoy in a narrative. So that's something games offer that I really like, is just that depth of different characters to engage with.
Yep,
For
sure.
Yeah, writing super cool. That's it. We're done with the main part of the podcast now, which means unless anyone's got like final positive vibes they want to throw out there for random game stuff,
I
I'm
mean,
gonna
I
say
think
the
our shoutouts could be
M1
one
Garens and games when they do the ping,
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
the M1 Garand
Oh, boy.
ping. I think anyone that's played a Battlefield game knows what I'm talking about.
Okay, but that's not actually that realistic, and
But it sounds really good.
I know.
Good vibes.
That's like a sound
That's
design.
actually-
It's
yeah.
great.
Doesn't matter, Ben. Dopamine.
No, that's another little good vibe. The dismissal of
Yeah.
realism for something that's just cooler, and that's a good example. Of it.
Games are, I think, the one medium that can really take advantage of that, and like, here's reality, but what if we made reality better?
Yeah, what if it
Well,
was
it's almost
actually
done out of
cool
necessity
instead?
to make a better
Yeah.
game a lot of the time. You know,
Well, yeah, it's
Like,
also-
if Battlefield 1 was more like World War 1 in real life, it would be
boring.
not nearly as
Yeah,
much
it
fun.
wouldn't
Yeah,
be as
Kind of-
fun.
it would
It'd
be a
kind of
slog.
garbage.
Yeah,
Yeah, I also
it would
think
just
it's
be a bunch of
like
people camping.
there
Sitting
are
in
certain
trenches all day.
examples where games have taken that too far and gone the wrong
Trench foot
direction.
simulator.
Yeah. But yeah,
Red Dead
it's,
2 takes it too far in some areas, I'd say.
but at the same time, like Red Dead 2 knows where to stop in some, but not all.
No,
They should have gone further on the
Positive
horse
vibes.
testicles. Just
Positive
saying.
vibes.
Now, I mean, those artists had to have had a wonderful time.
Oh my god.
Oh, I hadn't even think. Let's just end the podcast
It's-
already. I can't deal with this
They must have
anymore.
went ballistic over it. Let me tell
Oh
you.
boy! All right, we've hit the point of
I'll
horse
see you all in therapy.
puns. So
Wow, that's all I'm saying. They looked pretty ballin'. That's all I'm saying.
all right,
I'm
great.
outta here. I gotta go.
So we're to
You're
shoutouts
really
now.
testing me, Wyatt.
oh god,
Oh, don't ball in the podcast. Come on
Nice.
now.
I hate it here.
Wyatt,
That's why I can't
Because I just need you to stop as soon as possible. What's your shout out?
It's a good question. Shout out to the longhouse. So no, the burrow system in Valhalla, because it makes it feel a lot like Mass Effect in some areas, and that is always a good thing. And I think it's really well done the way you're upgrading it, and as you upgrade it, you're introduced to new important characters, and it gives you buffs in gameplay as you're upgrading it, and I think it's super cool.
All right, Brett, I can feel you quaking in your chair.
I like I said before, I've been playing Chrono Trigger, and I didn't really ever see too much about it before, but I know that people have considered it since the day that it came out to be like one of the best games ever, and it's like, how could a SNES game be the best game of all time? The game came out like 2,000 years ago, and
Story and characters.
it kind of might be like I really like there are just some things that happen, and I'm just like, how is this made on like how is this made like next to like Mario? What?
Yeah,
That's how I feel about Hades.
Yeah. All right.
it's a banger.
I'm gonna piggyback off of that and say the opening to Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Oh,
Having just watched one of my
Oh.
roommates play it
Oh.
last week is just bonkers to me because
it's insane.
it shows that how creative you could get with the ending of like a SNES game essentially, and turn it into the opening of the next game, which is just really cool.
Oh,
Stuff like
yeah.
that is just a lot of fun. And I also love like the non-traditional starts of like suddenly you're super powerful and then you just get smacked down. It's always fun.
What
That-
does a man-
That taste of power.
Yeah,
opening
the
section
taste
is
of
always fun.
Endgame. All right,
I hinted
Alex.
at what's to come later.
I feel like you're ready, Alex. Intensely
Ooh.
prepared for the shout out.
It's kind of just low-key. Shout out to people who want to know the opposite of in.
You are a terrible human being, and that was such a stretch. And I was on the line, right? I was on the line. I was barely able to sustain the positive vibes due to certain few things that were brought up during this podcast, and now that's over.
It's all
done.
coming out now.
I
All
I
right.
do have an actual one that's just quick. A shout out to the bag of peppermint patties that helped me
Oh,
through finals.
We love peppermint patties.
Now I'm
man.
jealous. I want the peppermint
Wonderful.
patties.
All right. Who's ready? Who's next?
I mean,
Hit me
who
with
is
it.
Next? I don't know. You
Say
run the
it, say it.
podcast, Not me.
Say it. I'm making you fight.
Hey, you won't.
Me?
Bet.
Shout out to the Exalted Orb that just dropped in Path of Exile, like right before we started the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
All right.
yeah.
You know, that's
it
good.
doubled
If
my
you
net worth. Yeah,
if you play Path of Exile, that's a big currency drop. That means you
Yeah,
can get
that's
some cool
huge.
stuff for your build.
yeah.
All right. That's it. We did the show.
Yeah.
I've hit the button. We're playing the outro right now. We hope you all have a good
That's how the show works.
day, week, whatever. Enjoy your holiday time. Remember to stay safe, especially in times we live in.
Have a little
Really?
scat to go.
Really think
Skip it
about.
about da.
Really think about if you were going to that party that you invited. Really think.